I don't like these headsets. And at least I'm in a position to do what I want. So thank you for coming all, and welcome to the many friends which I know since many years. I'm going to give this presentation in English, even if I'm very critical to talk English to German people, because there is an, let's say, a reduction in the preciseness of the transfer of informations. Very often the speaker does not hit the top of the nail, and very often the recipient of the information does not understand where the nail really sits. So however, I might use a couple of Latin expressions, maybe some French or maybe some German ones, please forgive me, but I think we are all Europeans. And the only non-European language is English. My introduction is always, I'm a European who has been born in Germany. And being a European is very important. So I unfortunately don't have any photographs from my childhood or the dogs I loved or whatever. I make it very simple, and I try to condense some of the thoughts which I experienced in the last 71 years. I was born in a Saturday night at 3 o'clock in the morning in a heavy thunderstorm. Remember the Rolling Stones song? A poor doctor, because he had to drive in the province in this heavy rain a couple of kilometers because I was born at home. Home birth was a tradition in 1953. The city I grew up was Aalen with a double A. And this comes from Secunda Alia Flavia, which was the largest Roman equestrial castle north of the Alps. So this tiny city of 12,000 inhabitants was full with history. And to even complete the story with these Romans, we have the oldest industrial fabrication in the world, which is a company, a foundry, being in business since 1345, continuously never went bankrupt. So the area was province, it was absolutely poor, but it had 2,000-year-long lasting history. The lineature of the mountains, of the hills was completely soft. We had a lot of forests, etc. So I grew up in the countryside, where everything was still and where everything was green, in a humanistic gymnasium where speaking Latin and speaking German, absolute to the precision, was a self-understanding issue. When I was about 16, 17, I ran out of pocket money. And since we were 3 sons, my parents were not capable to spend us the money we wanted to have, so I started painting discotheques. So I was the discotheque painter #1 in the entire region. And we had this LSD thing. So I was 1780s, LSD came up, and hashish and all these things. So we can call it a late night delirium situation. Alcohol was less important because getting to a flight was much more cheap to do it with LSD. It was a hard work, I tell you, being a discotheque painter. The biggest thing I did was one painting which was about 10 to 12 meters long, 5.50 meters high. It was 2 times the globe, 1 times from the south and 1 times from the north direction, but the continents were not a landscape, it was a human brain. And there were 2 naked blonde girls flying around, and since the painting was 12 meters, they were 1-to-1. Which then caused the absolute bomb in the province, because this was unacceptable to have good-looking naked girls flying around in the discotheque. So the path was clear. It was about becoming a stage designer. This was the decision. I wanted to become a stage designer. But then we had the first oil crisis, and when I took the train and moved to Stuttgart and then went to Munich, and talked to the people about becoming a stage designer, they said, you can do that, but better you go directly to the Arbeitsamt, because there is no payment, there is no jobs, and if you study this, you will ruin yourself. was quite disappointing for me. So what should I do? And since I was always a little bit in this designing of houses and buildings and so on, I said maybe architecture or engineering. I was indecisive, not really knowing where to go. As a boy coming from the province, totally disappointed with the stage design flop. And at those times you had the zentrale Zulassungsstelle für Studienplätze. This was a thing based in Dortmund, as boring as the title of the administration, and then you had to fill out with your pen what you wanted to study and where, with a hierarchy. So number 1 is city A. If this does not work, please take city B, city 3, city 4. And indecisive as I was, I applied for architecture and structural engineering. The answer came. Disappointing, totally disappointing, because architecture was in Kaiserslautern. So I hope there's nobody here from Kaiserslautern. At least no one here having a tomato in the pocket. Because I correlated Kaiserslautern with Rammstein, and I said in a city where it is filled up with soldiers, this is not the place I want to live. So I decided to study structural engineering in Stuttgart, which had a world-famous faculty for structural engineering. All the popes of concrete came from Stuttgart. Mm-hmm. The first scientific chair for designing concrete was Emil Mörsch, 1916, Stuttgart. Then years later, Fritz Leonhard. He was the absolute pope. If he would have said 1 + 1 is 3, all the engineers worldwide, yes, Mr. Leonhard, you are right again. And then his successor was Jörg Schleich. We meet this name later on. So I started there studying, and I was totally surprised because we learned very intensively how to explain how the things work, doing analysis, analyzing everything. So after a few weeks, we were capable to explain that this is nonsense, what we had to analyze. So me being very shy, and at those times you had to say to a professor, "Good morning, Herr Professor." No chance by the family name only, and not as nowadays by first name. So you said, "Herr Professor, I don't really understand why we have to analyze the thing, because this is totally mad." And then he said, "This is what you have to get used to. The architects are designing those things. They are typically mad, and the engineer has to make them standing." So I said, definitely this is not what I'm going to do. So I applied once again for a study place architecture, and lucky enough I got it in Stuttgart. So I started studying architecture in parallel, and then I soon found out this is great. The architects are doing synthesis, the engineering are doing analysis. I'm doing both, so I'm capable to design something, to analyze it, to redesign it, to analyze it on a very scientific preciseness. This is what I did. After a couple of months, it became somehow questionable what I learned there in the Faculty of Architecture, because the talks were limited to steel, to concrete, to glass. Wood was not the topic, brick was not the topic. And I said, why don't we learn something about working with black rubber or with yellow fabrics? This is not the material we are working with. We are Stuttgart faculty, and we talk about the revitalization of modern architecture and the continuation of Bauhaus and so on. So this is Swabian strictness and simplicity and clarity. And I said, okay, this is not what I want to do. So I fell in love in semester 2 in designing with fabrics. I was always in love with women's clothes and so on, so I precisely, even nowadays, can tell you which collection is from Yves Saint Laurent, Valentino, or whatever. So I said, I have to learn that. The professor said, no chance. So I went to the faculty for machine engineers, and they had a chair for weaving technologies and fiber technologies, and said, good morning, Mr. Professor. I'm a student of architecture. Wow, you are the first architect applying here. I said, yeah, I don't have a study place, but may I sit in the last row of the lecture hall and listen a little bit because I'm interested? No, you have to sit in the first row. So I was sitting in the first row, and every 5 minutes he said, "Can an architect understand this?" So all the others were totally unimportant because he permanently was focusing on me. Can you understand it? Can you? Okay. But this way I learned everything from the filament to the fiber to the yarn to the weaving to the non-woven to the whatever. Gestricke, Gewirke, and so on is easy for me to differentiate. But there was a couple of things missing. There was building with titanium and high-strength aluminum. And since the architects were unwilling to teach us how that could work, I went to the professor for aircraft design. Same story, good morning, Herr Professor. So I was sitting there and learned about fuselage design. Fuselage is the aircraft's body and how to link the wings to the fuselage and all those things. At the bitter end, I knew precisely how to design high-strength aluminum, titanium, and all those things. And this is how I composed my studies. I just did what I wanted. And I said, it is obviously called university and not monoversity. So why should I study mono, architecture or this, if you find the gold in between the disciplines, in the terra incognita, in the land of the unknown? This is probably where the future is and where the truth is. So this was my way to study, to live, to think, the terra incognita, beyond the known borders. Running again, this was a constant issue for me. Out of money, I applied for a Hilfswissenschaftler job, HIWI, at the Institute of the famous architect Frei Otto. But as I found later on, Frei Otto had no obligation to teach. So he had a bunch of assistants, which themselves all were, let's say, the company of the king. And the king was more or less invisible for a student. And the secretary he had was a quite nice-looking woman, but she was quite bitey too. So when I was there first time, I want to study with Mr. Frei Otto, and can I work here? No, never, there's the door. Fifth time, she said, okay, obviously you don't give up. He comes here 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so come back. So I came back, it took us 2 minutes, and then I was a hippie, sitting there with big ears and trying to understand what they do. And in this moment, it was between semester 3 or 4, I decided to become his successor. It was very clear for me, this is the path to go. When Frei Otto retires, you are the one to replace him. He was not that old at those times, so there was plenty of time given for me so that I could do my things. And my colleagues, they always said, Werner, you are now in semester 13 and a half. This is not really a streamlining thing, and when you apply for a job, might it be Züblin or Strabag or this or that architectural office, they will tell you, we don't take students with 14 semesters. So I said, okay, I will never apply for a job in my life. There is no letter of application existing. I never applied for a job. And as you might have learned, it somehow worked out. So not being a monoverse, but a universe orientation, not being 1 or 2 disciplines, but a multidisciplinary educated person, working as a student quite hard, definitely, but trying to find what the most noble thing of a researcher or someone who has visited a university is, to find out where is the boundary of know-how and where is the land of unknown. And this is characterizing my entire life. Where is the boundary to the land of unknown? Where is the terra incognita? Because the interesting thing is, if you know this boundary, then you have to know everything up to the boundary. Otherwise, you can't define it. So I had a lot of luck in my lifetime because I had 5 teachers, doctores, academici, and stand on the shoulders of which I can stand. So the first one was, I already mentioned, Fray Otto. And I initially had a deal with him. I do my diploma thesis with him under his supervision. And when the point in time came closer and closer, I felt a little bit more unsure and unsure because his way to do science was not coincident with my interpretation of doing science. So by accident, I met Jörg Schleich, blah, blah, blah. He offered me a job, do the diploma thesis here, and you can also do a doctorate with me. So I changed the countries, not knowing that Schleich was the biggest enemy of Fray Otto and also the other way around. So when I changed, let's say, the party, I somehow fell in a big dilemma, which I learned later on. Then, during my architectural studies, I studied with Jürgen Jödicke, Theorie der modernen Architektur, who brought architecture to an aspect beyond shape and colors and dimension and whatever. He brought it to the human being's existence, on the feeling a human being has, not an architect, an amateur, someone who is ill, someone who is old, someone who is going to die. What is, what he said, a person which is dying requiring? Definitely not an architectural sensation. Nothing visual because the eyes are closed. So it's about non-visual architecture these people require. Ill people too. It is about the echo in the room, it is about the smelling, the odorical things, it is about tactility. How do you hold your bed in the minute you are going to die? Is this a quality or is it a non-quality? If we pass a bridge, we say Handlauf. Lass die Hand laufen auf einem feuerverzinkten Metallgeländer. Das ist kein Handlauf. Also es geht um das Nicht-Visuelle, es geht um das Fühlen, es geht um die Seele, für die wir verantwortlich sind. Das war der große Beitrag von Jürgen Jödicke. Und jetzt ein Architekt wieder, er ist ein Architekt, ein Ingenieur, dann ein Architekt, und jetzt kommt Klaus Linkwitz, I changed to English, a professor for geodesy. Ja, wir können ja erwarten, dass die Zuhörer noch Deutsch verstehen, zumindest in Ansätzen. So a professor for geodesy. There was one only sentence I took from him which turned my scientific position. One sentence. So I was sitting in Fray Otto's tent, gluing scripts for money. Then Fray Otto came with a man I did not know. Very elegant appearance. And they stopped in front of my desk. I simulated, I pretended to work, but my ears became bigger and bigger. Then Fray Otto said, and if you look upwards in the institute, you see these steel cables which form a fisher net. And then Klaus Linkwitz, whom I became a very close friend later on, said, I don't see a fisher net. I see a geodesic net. Imagine what that means. The one looks at a piece of structure and identifies this, the geometry of it, the topology of it, with a fisher net. And this other person looking at the same thing says, this is no fisher net, this is a geodesic net. And this gave me the idea of multi-perspectivity, which I was always following. And now one thing is clear, the human being has 2 eyes, because only with 2 eyes you can see the depth. Only the 2-eye, the stereo situation, gives you the ability and the capability to understand the depth. With 1 eye, everything is flat. And having several eyes, one from structural engineering, one from architecture, one from geodesy, blah, 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 then you have a multidimensional view to the things. And you have another view, definitely. You have the capability of the other view. And this is how I formed my life. And then finally, Myron Goldsmith from Chicago, someone who revolutionized as a student the structural systems for high-rise buildings. Working with SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in Chicago, he was the one under the supervisorship of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe at the Illinois Institute of Technology, who invented all the structures which make it possible to build high-rise buildings higher than 250 meters in an economic way. Because the technology applied up to this time, 1953, ended to be economic somehow at 200 meters. And the rest was money thrown out the window or totally nonsense if it comes to 300 to 400 meters. And he opened the door as a student. And then he gave me a copy of his thesis, Structural Systems for High-Rise Buildings, accepted by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe on the 16th of May 1953, the day I was born. So Myron and I became very, very close friends. And this opened the door for me to the Chicago Architectural and Engineering Society. So for many, many years I lived in Chicago, and I was, as the successor of Mies van der Rohe, working there as a professor for 7 or 8 years. So standing on the shoulders of such giants gives you a wider sight. This was the study time, these were the teachers influencing me, this was the way how I tried to make it. How I tried to find my own position in this world of people designing, shaping, engineering the built environment. It was in 2020 when Zumtobel company asked me to do an illustration of their annual business report. They are a stock company, so they have to build a report which clearly describes income, outcome, balances, blah, 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 20, 30 pages, has to be then printed in thousands of exemplars and sent to all the shareholders. And they already 18 years ago said, this is something that people receive and put it in their waste paper basket. If we make it a little more attractive, they might put it in the bookshelf. So from then on, in every year they gave an artist or an architect or someone a contract to design the entire business report, excluded the part with the numbers, deliver 6,000 samples of it for X money. So this was my job. And I looked on the exemplars before, and I found out, okay, this is always a certain self-documentation of the architectural heroes, showing their big projects and so on and so on. And I said, this is not what I'm going to do. And at those times, we were somehow in discussion about Luther's theses and so on, and I learned by my personal advisor, who is a religion historian, that the thesis in the 14, 15, 1600s was not a these in the scientific sense of today. I make a statement and I call it a these, which has to be verified and falsified. No, thesis, also in the sense of Luther, was something which you write down. It is a part of your doctoral dissertation, and then put on the entrance door of the auditorium, and when you have your oral presentation and the defense of your doctoral dissertation, since there was no copy shop there, the other professor could read the theses in the entrance door, then they got a picture of what the man did, went in and did the oral exam. So I said, okay, Luther was with 89. I do 17 theses for Zumtobel, which was a big success. The book was read, oversized, was eatable. It was all totally organic. And these 17 theses became very important for the, let's say, for the direction of the content we are following in our team. Might it have been the institute I was heading for 25 years, now I'm retired, as you know, or in our office. And I pick a few of those theses. Look at this. This is not translatable, because der Begriff Heimat existiert nicht in der englischen Sprachwelt. Heimat ist etwas anderes als Homeland oder Home. Heimat ist die metaphysische Wahrnehmung dessen, wo wir uns zu Hause oder wohlfühlen, was uns Sicherheit gibt, was uns Erinnerung gibt. Das ist nicht das Haus und das ist nicht das Heimatland, sondern es ist das als rational darstellbares Etwas, es ist das metaphysische Moment. Und Bauen, und das ist auch unsere Tätigkeit, ist nichts anderes als der Produktionsversuch menschlicher Heimat. Lesen Sie den Philosophen Ernst Bloch, das Prinzip Hoffnung, 3 Bände. Bedauerlicherweise ist Bloch gestorben, bevor ich überhaupt realisiert habe, dass er in Tübingen gelehrt hat, also unweit meiner Heimat. Und das ist ein Zitat von Bloch. Bauen ist der Produktionsversuch menschlicher Heimat. Das müssen wir schaffen. Und das ist viel, viel mehr als die visuelle Architektur. Die nicht visuelle ist mindestens genauso wichtig. Ich sprach vorher über die sterbenden oder über die kranken Menschen. Und im Laufe dieser Zeit habe ich dann ein Büro gegründet etc. als One-Man-Company. Now we are 450. We create one working place every 3.5 weeks. Unlimited, no conditioned contracts, unlimited contracts. It's a question of fairness to the people which work with you and which support you and which are the prominent part of the creation of what we did. And I asked myself, as I very often do, if there's the mainstream of information flowing around, population in the world will increase, blah, 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 blah. I said, what is the picture of 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, billions? What does this mean? Okay, billions now, this is the drama, Milliarden. Yeah? Also if we have a population increase of 2 Milliarden until 2050, what does this mean? And I said, okay, how many people are going to die per second? And how many are born per second? And what is the net difference? And the difference is 2.6 in 2020. Nowadays, 2.4. But this was the work we did for Zumtobel, and there it was 2.6. And then I asked the next question. I said, okay, this is a netto increase. And these people, these kiddies, they have the right, the moral right for us to ask for eine gebaute Heimat. What does this mean, material-wise, energy-wise, emission-wise? What is gebaute Heimat if you bring it down to some brutal engineering economic numbers? And then I raised the question, how much building material does every one of us own as a citizen of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland? You own private living areas, maybe some of you have a factory, and you as a citizen also own all the infrastructure divided by 38 million people, 83 million people. How much is that? You are architects, this is the first number you should know. Because if a client tells you, please build me a house, 200 square meter, you would have to say, this is the amount of material we need. This is the emission we are going to cause. So every citizen in the Bundesrepublik Deutschland owns around 450 tons of building material, 450 tons. Half of it is infrastructure, the other half is buildings, means Gebäude. In the third world, the people, or the global south, which is now the new terminology, ist eine Worthülse genauso wie die erste, weil keiner was darunter versteht. And if you ask someone, what is global south, who belongs to it and who not, there is no clear definition. So we are using terms and using a terminology where nobody really made a precise decision of what we are talking about. Yeah, this is like buying a car and at the end you find out it has only 3 tires. Precision in the communication. So if you take the German building material amount of 450 tons and you multiply it by 2.6, then you have to extract more than 1,000 metric tons per second out of the surface of the planet. And the emissions you cause in the transition from a resource to a building material, to a building component, to the building itself, cause more than 50% of the emissions human beings are doing. So this gives you an idea. And a person in the third world owns 75. In an industrialized country, average 335. And the difference is 260. Multiplied by how many people? How many people live in the so-called third world? And in the first world, global north, it's us, it's 1.4 milliarden. Global south is 6.6. So if everyone in the global south states, I have the right to have the same, let's say, built environment with ICE train stations and tunnels and bridges as the Germans do, then you would have to build the already existing built environment 2 times more within 25 years. And now it becomes obvious this does not work. And now architecture and urban planning meets politics. If you, as I did since many, many years, analyze and further analyze and further analyze the thing, it becomes quite clear that we as the human society have to, in a more or less revolutionary way, in a few years which are left only, completely change the direction we are running after. If we continue to maximize the personal profit, if we continue to have eine Wettbewerbsgesellschaft, a competition society, if we continue to do so, and if we do not look at the nature of what is happening there, then we won't survive the 2100s, definitely not. Maybe a few do, but not the majority of the 8 billions. So I stated as the thesis number 17, natura mensura est. In the former times, it was always Deus mensura est. God is the measure. And when the so-called enlightenment, the Aufklärung, started to take place, it was homo mensura est. The human being is the measure. This was the time when the scientists started to make a difference between nature und Umwelt. Yeah? In the 1600s, 1500s, the human being was a part of nature, and the nature was a part of the human living condition. This was a unity. And then, in the Aufklärung, we came up with this wonderful idea, wonderful in brackets, to say, we turn the human being into a subject and the nature into an object. And this is the object, and we call it Umwelt. And we are not part of the Umwelt. This is the Umwelt, which can be explored, which can be demolished, which can be manipulated, whatever poisoned. This is Umwelt. And nowadays we have to realize that we damage so many areas and parts of the Umwelt that we have to rethink the term and just look at the word, as I always recommend to do, Umwelt. The word itself expresses the problem we caused. So we have to reintegrate the Umwelt into the nature. We have to understand that we are part of the nature, and this means natura mensura est. There is no human action which violates the functionality of nature. This is the objective. This is the headline above the entrance door to every academy from now on. Natura mensura est. And then, so I come to an end, 1 minute. When I started to write my last book, which I promised to deliver in a few weeks, but I now prolonged it to 1.5 years more, because the question was building in the future. I said to my secretary, nothing more easy, make a reservation 2 times 6 weeks, and I will dictate the thing, and then we print it. And then I did the contents. I said, okay, this is now all you know how. This is the recipe book. It is completely useless because the human beings are not reading it and they are not following and not doing what is necessary. Nor the architects, nor the engineers, nor the politicians, nor the regular people outside there. No one is doing what is necessary to be done. And I ask myself the question, why is there a gap between Wissen und Handeln? Why don't the people act in a completely another way than their understanding of the problems would dictate them? And then I started working in this field, talked to sociologists and other people, trying to find out, is it manipulation of the people? Is it stupidity? What is it? And then a sentence came up to my mind, which really made me struggling. And this is thesis number 18, which is going to be published tomorrow to the honor of my close friend Matteo Thun. But I'll give you a short insight. What is thesis 18? For the first time in the more than 300,000 year long history of Homo sapiens, for the first time ever in the human history, it makes an impact on my life condition if someone else in Australia, Tasmania, Argentina, or wherever poisons the atmosphere with his emissions. For the first time ever. Up to now, you always could say, oh, these Chinese, it doesn't belong to me, doesn't interest me. It is from now on of a deep and high interest. For the first time ever, the moralic failure of someone poisoning the atmosphere will affect my living conditions. I condensed this then into a statement which can be translated to Dein Tun berührt mein Leben. Take this with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the talk and for all the Wissen, the knowledge. I also wonder, what do you think there is a gap between what we know about sustainability and what we do regarding sustainability?
We can't make it that short.
Yeah, sure.
There's complex reasons. One reason is a clear level of mis- and disinformation. Point.
And then?
And then people cannot understand it because they don't get the information basis to understand it. See, everyone since 50 years is energy effective. Yeah, energy effectivity is the number one goal in the German country. If you ask people, why are you energy effective? The answer is, yeah, because of the Umwelt or because of the Russian gas or I don't know. The reason why we have to be energy effective traces back to 1973 when the OPEC countries, freshly formed, and the European countries as well as the United States supported the Yom Kippur Krieg, Israel, then the OPEC countries turned on the oil handle. And then the oil price shot up and you could not afford oil and gas in Germany anymore, so the government closed the Autobahnen on the weekends, people were migrating there and riding bicycles, etc. And then the German government said, we have to be independent from this. And they filed a law, which is the Energy Saving Law, 1976. And the preamble in the law says, dies ist ein Gesetz zur Stabilisierung des Bundeshaushaltes und der Lockerung der Abhängigkeit von Erdöllieferstaaten. There is no word about green or the atmosphere or the future. It is a handelsstrategisches Gesetz. And since then, this is the basis, and since then we are following that path. And then Kyoto came, and Kyoto for the first time ever said, scientifically based, we have an emission problem. And then the German government, as many others said, okay, we understand this, but we are already on the right path, because if we save energy, then we also save emission. And this is wrong. And nobody knows it, but this is wrong. The emissions we do are not only the emissions by combusting gas and oil in our cellar. There are other emissions too, and they are completely overlooked and not disputed and not discussed, but they have a relatively high percentage.
Do you think that's what is mostly overlooked regarding sustainability? Is that fact, or is there something else that is highly overlooked?
The sustainability is somehow a boring thing, but you have to tell the people that it is unaffordable to continue the path of the German government with the insulation or energy efficient technology. This costs, it was not evaluated by me, but by the Deutsche Energieagentur and many other research centers, costs in total 3,500 Milliarden. So I'm obviously the only one in Germany who says, okay, take the number and divide it by the number of inhabitants. This is 42,000 per capita. Young bus driver, freshly married, one kid, 126,000. It's unaffordable. And it's not sense-making, because we don't have an energy problem, we have an emission problem, and this is something different. And if I'm going to tell the people, you have to focus on the emissions and not only on energy, then I'm touching gigantic money flows and money interests, financial interests. We have to be aware of that too. Look on the German car industry. They did not make the turn to the electric car for several reasons, which we do not dispute now. Now they're trying to return back to combustion engines, and nobody's protesting. Because everyone fears, at least in Stuttgart, the area where I was living for 45 years, everyone is fearing that he is losing his working place.
Sure.
So now the deal is keep the working place or pollute the atmosphere. And this is the big question our human society has to dispute, to discuss, and to solve. Surviving means no combustion anymore. It might mean lose your working place, lose your richness, lose whatever.
Another level of standard.
Times are going to be hard. This is predictable. You don't need to be a professor.
I have one question that maybe we can get a short answer, and this is another topic, and I hope you allow me that.
Make it short.
And it's, I wonder what would you like to be your legacy when you, at some point, stop working?
I'm not arrogant, but out of the people working with me, my doctoral students and the people close to me in my office, we have in the meantime, I think, 32 professors. So this is a school. And they all take the ideas we develop together. It's not only about me, even if I'm here standing alone on the stage. We develop those things together, and they continue to further develop that and to multiply that to their students and to the human society. And I'm doing what I can do in being here, or advising politicians, writing books, giving interviews, etc., to help the people. The people are not stupid. They are also not unwilling. They don't have the right information, which is the essentia, the quinta essentia of a democracy, by the way. A democracy is constituted by two things: der mündige Bürger und die komplette Kontrolle der Bürger über die staatlichen Institutionen. This is democracy.
Well, I have to think about that.
Yeah, then you will find out that we don't have a democracy. Aber der mündige Bürger heißt die Freiheit, Informationen zu bekommen, die er mit anderen Bürgern in einem öffentlichen Diskussionsraum besprechen kann, um sich eine Meinung darüber zu bilden, was die Politiker, die ihn vertreten, denn tun sollen. Aber wenn der mündige Bürger gar keine Chance hat, die Informationen zu bekommen, weil sie einfach nicht präzise darliegen, dann kann der in diesem öffentlichen Diskussionsraum ja nur Unfug reden. Entsprechend ist ja die Enttäuschung.
Difficult time for information with so many fake news and so on. That's a very hard topic. If you allow me, I would like to start the round of discussion.
Yeah, please.
It was an honor to have you on the stage. I will give it to you back in a minute because we are going to start a round of discussion, if you don't want to say something else.
I'll be quiet.
Thank you for the talk and thank you for the interview.